The classical hero requires a certain kind of suspension of disbelief from the audience. He or she is often larger than life, capable of superhuman feats, and can often defy the laws of nature. It is up to the audience to accept this character and believe in the hero's capabilities in order to appreciate the story being told. This suspension of disbelief is necessary for an audience to connect with the hero and understand the journey they are going on. Yet, I think as the modern reader, that can often be an exhausting task. I think contemporary American art and literature does a much better job of creating heroes that are more relatable and believable. These characters are often flawed and have to overcome their own weaknesses to succeed, or fall short in their goals. Anti-heroes that can be viewed as both flawed and heroic, depending on the story, are becoming increasingly popular. This allows for a much deeper level of connection with the audience, as the characters are no longer an idealized version of the hero, but a flawed individual struggling to overcome their own weaknesses and achieve their goals. I want to look at a particular character from a particularly American story that many consider to be the base anti-hero. Before we start diving into Willy Loman from Death of a Salesman as my example of an American antihero, we must first define what exactly an antihero is. As I have learned, there are many somewhat conflicting definitions and opinion on what makes an antihero. My favorite, and the framework I'll be using throughout this essay, is the one established by Orrin Klopp in his 1948 paper, which states an antihero is inherently a hero from a specific point of view, and a villain from another. Generally, a character that can be viewed from these opposing perspectives can also be viewed through Nicholas Laham's framework for an antihero, which states, although antiheroes may sometimes perform actions that most of the audience considers morally correct, their reasons for doing so may not align with the audience's morality. It is also important to make the distinction between a tragic hero and an antihero. A tragic hero is a character who has a fatal flaw that leads to their downfall. This downfall often results in the hero's death or some form of tragedy. An anti-hero, however, is a character who has traits that are not traditionally heroic, but still manages to perform heroic deeds or operate from a place of morality. Ultimately, what we must understand is that an anti-hero does not have to be likable, and depending on one's perspective, the anti-hero could be a villain or a hero. Klopp's paper cites Charles Lindbergh as an example of an American anti-hero. Lindbergh was a celebrated aviator who made his first solo flight across the Atlantic, yet he was also a Nazi sympathizer. His actions of heroism, bravery, and patriotism were praised, while his political views were widely condemned. This is a perfect example of how an anti-hero can be seen as a hero from one perspective and a villain from another. Charles Lindbergh is not a relatable anti-hero, but Willy Loman certainly is. In Lee Siegel's 2012 New York Times op-ed, he describes how when Death of a Salesman was released in 1949, audiences were able to relate to Willy Loman's struggle to attain a sense of dignity and purpose in life. His dream of achieving a middle-class lifestyle and providing for his family was something that resonated with many people, and his desperate cry of, "The competition is bad," was likely chilling to theatergoers who still believed in the idea of fair competition. Willy's search for humanity within his profit-driven job also likely struck a chord with audiences, and it was no surprise that after performances during the play's first run, some, especially men, were bent forward covering their faces, and others were openly weeping. To these people, no matter how flawed Willy Loman was, he was certainly a hero. Not everyone saw Willy Loman as a hero. Many saw him as an anti-American villain, and some even protest what they saw as a piece of communist propaganda. As a result, the 1951 film adaptation of Death of a Salesman was deliberately tweaked in order to downplay its criticism of the American system. It is not simply public perception that renders Mr. Loman an anti-hero, but, perhaps even more importantly, his character traits and motivations in the play. At the core of his character is a flawed set of values that lead him to prioritize superficial success in life over true happiness. Willy idolizes the idea of the American dream and desperately wants to attain it. Yet, his pursuit of it is misguided, leading him to make ill-advised decisions, such as taking out an insurance policy on his life. His pursuit of the American dream also causes him to be overly critical of his sons, Biff and Happy. While Willy's pursuit of the American dream aligns with an American audience's ambitions, his superficial reasons for doing so may not align with the audience's morality. His flawed values and misguided pursuit of the American dream make him a relatable anti-hero, one who inspires empathy, but also immense criticism. While some may argue Willy Loman is a tragic hero, I propose that his fall from grace does not come from a character flaw, but from the flawed system and expectation of the American dream, and his misguided attempt at achieving it. He is a hero from one perspective, someone who is trying to make his life better, and a villain from another, someone who is blinded by ambition and is unable to find contentment in his own life. On his only visit to Greece in 1904, as he treaded up the steps of the Acropolis, Sigmund Freud was engulfed by a strange, unfamiliar feeling of alienation. He couldn't shake the sensation long after his visit, and it was only after 32 years of rumination and analysis that he was able to come to terms with the experience. He wrote, "When finally, on the afternoon of our arrival, I stood on the Acropolis and cast my eyes upon the landscape, a surprising thought suddenly entered my mind. So this really does exist. The whole psychological situation, which seems so confused and is so difficult to describe, can be satisfactorily cleared, assuming that at the time I had, or might have had, a momentary feeling. What I see is not real. Such a feeling is known as a feeling of derealization." Freud couldn't believe the accuracy in which he imagined the columns for which he had never seen. It was almost as if he had been there before, like the Acropolis was simply a looking glass that reflected his own imaginings back at him. I felt somewhat similarly when analyzing Death of a Salesman and Willy Loman. Prior to analyzing, I had never read Death of a Salesman, yet I could relate to Willy. I recognized his ambition and pursuit of fiscal security, while also understanding his misguided attempts to achieve that ambition. I had somewhat of a similar derealization with Willy Loman as Freud had with the Acropolis, and it is almost as if the character was somehow a reflection of my own thoughts and emotions. It was almost as if Arthur Miller had taken my own flawed ambition and encapsulated them into a character on paper. Although I had never read Death of a Salesman, for some reason I felt like I had read it 1,000 different times.